She was born 100 years ago to Canadian missionaries in southwestern China. Throughout her long life, China is the place she has called home. As an avowed communist and as an anthropologist and teacher, she has devoted herself to China's socialist cause. She is Isabel Crook. In Western Beijing, there is a prestigious language school, Beijing Foreign Studies University. On the campus, there lives a legend.
北外社区苏贺杯运动会现在开始，有的老同志已年逾80，其中年龄最大的是伊莎白老师，已经102岁了，掌声送给伊莎白。健身气功8段锦，预备式，左脚抬步。
Isabel is a veteran professor at Beijing Foreign University. She helped found the school at the dawn of a new China. For her, being an English teacher was both unexpected and exciting.
We'd only been invited to come to do the land reform, but after we'd done it, they said, "We hope you will stay, and because we'll soon defeat the Kuomintang, and we'll set up a government to have translators for our foreign service as diplomats. We need diplomats that can speak English."
From this point on, Isabel Crook, along with her husband David, began 50 years of teaching that would significantly contribute to China's progress.
They were treasures of China. It's not been easy for them. They've experienced the ups and downs of New China over the past decades. And they've always stuck by China.
Isabel means a lot to our university. She was involved in founding it. She's had an influence on many leading English teachers at the university.
The university was established in 1948, a year before the founding of New China. At the time, it was designed to become the cradle of China's leading diplomats, English translators, and teachers.
As I recall, it was early 1948. The Chinese Communist Party established a school of foreign affairs. The teachers were all foreign comrades, including David Crook and Isabel.
We were thrilled to be asked to stay because we wanted to see how the changing of the society would take place. This was just what we liked most. It was very exciting, so of course we said yes, we'd stay.
There were hardly any formal classes or textbooks. Take the research class, for example. The students discussed current affairs with the teacher or read some magazines and articles.
They didn't even have books. For Isabel and her colleagues, it was a struggle to provide English texts.
She typed herself because China was very poor, and the school had not enough fund to buy books for the students. What I appreciate or admire was her spirit, consistent spirit of wanting to do something good for the mankind. Yeah. She wants to see China progress, and she takes pleasure in that.
So one day, when we had a big class, or rather a lecture, we had Isabel standing in the middle, and all the students surrounded her. And there was a microphone, you know. So before she started talking, she touched the microphone, and then suddenly there was a shock, electric shock, and she fell down and hurt the back of her head. So we were all so very worried, and we hurried her to the hospital, and luckily there was nothing very serious. And what's very serious, she at that time was pregnant. She had Carl Crook, their first boy, here. You know, everybody was so worried that it would hurt the baby. But anyway, nothing happened. And after a few months, she gave birth to her first son, that is Carl Crook.
Having participated in the founding of the university, David and Isabel went on teaching English devotedly. In 1971, they were invited to join a task force compiling the first Chinese-English dictionary to be published in the history of New China. They finally completed the work in 1978, just as China launched the policy of reform and opening to the outside world. The dictionary played a vital role in a sudden upsurge in English learning. Isabel has always been among her students. 11 years ago, she was the subject of a poem written in celebration of her 90th birthday.
Outstanding is the contribution the hard-working gardener has made. The flowers under her care have blossomed all over the world. Over half a century ago, a young lady came over the ocean from a distant continent. Always shining, even in the twilight, is her brilliant radiation.
The grey building on campus was built in 1954. It was the first apartment block the university built and was primarily for its foreign teachers. Isabel has been living here ever since she moved in, when the building was erected.
I remember I was working abroad. I came back to China a few times and went to visit her at her home. It was on the second or third floor, a very small flat. Senior foreign experts like her have been offered with better apartments. I asked around and found she declined the offer. She has devoted herself wholly to China's revolutionary and socialist cause.
While Isabel's connection with the Beijing Foreign Studies University goes back nearly 70 years, her association with China started even much earlier, when she was born. Isabel's father was Professor Homer Brown. He arrived in China from Canada in 1912 as a 30-year-old missionary. He became Dean of the Education Department of West China Union University in Chengdu, the provincial capital of Sichuan Province in southwest China.
My parents worked in the university, and we had a house on the campus, and that's where I lived. It was a very big house, and we had foreign servants. So that's the sort of place we lived.
Isabel's mother, Muriel Hockey, came to Chengdu from Canada in 1913 and attended a Chinese language school where she met Homer Brown. She gave birth to Isabel 2 years later. Isabel's parents made sure she enjoyed a carefree childhood. Then, after middle school, they sent her to Canada to get a university education. They hoped she would follow it and become a missionary. But Isabel had other ideas. In 1938, back in China, she turned her attention to a field that had begun to fascinate her: anthropology. She headed off to the mountain villages of western Sichuan and started to research rural life there.
In Sichuan, when she was doing anthropological research, crossing the Dadu River on a chain, sitting on a hanging basket, crossing the river. Very exciting. I always wanted to do something like that.
I love climbing mountains. That was my hiking. I like to hike up into the mountains.
Still, however, young Isabel felt there was something missing from her life. She lacked a cause to believe in. She asked her mother for Christian books, but they failed to satisfy her yearning.
But fortunately, at that time I met David Crook, who had fought in Spain and was very political. And so I found it much easier to have a cause and have it to be communism.
David Crook was a British communist who had fought in the Spanish Civil War. To young Isabel, he was a war hero. To her parents, he was a man of principle. David was a colleague of Isabel's sister. He courted Isabel by cycling with her. After several trips out together, he proposed, and she accepted.
She was, in her younger days, raised with a Christian outlook and with a very pacifist view that transforming society through peaceful means like Gandhi, like, these people was the ideal. And my father persuaded her that that was not always that would not always work, and you needed to take more decisive action. And she eventually was convinced and bought into this very wholeheartedly.
After their engagement, Isabel returned to the mountains to carry on with her research.
There was a movement there. It was called the Rural Reconstruction Movement. And I got to know some of the people in the Rural Reconstruction Movement. And I thought that that's just the thing that I would like to do. I would like to, see how you can help the poor.
Isabel contributed to the Rural Reconstruction Movement by conducting a house-to-house survey in a mountainous township. The movement aimed at reviving the crumbling rural economy without changing the land ownership system. It was approved and supported by the nationalist government, which controlled much of China at the time. Isabel was keen to help. She and a colleague spent 18 months working on the survey.
And she at that time is young people, but she is very passionate to join the rural reconstruction movements. And also because of mainstream government still allow or encourage these intellectuals contribute whatever they have in the rural regeneration, rural reconstruction. So that is why he allocated himself and then to facilitate the rural reconstruction movements in this Xinlongchang.
She was born 100 years ago to Canadian missionaries in southwestern China. Throughout her long life, China is the place she has called home. As an avowed communist and as an anthropologist and teacher, she has devoted herself to China's socialist cause. She is Isabel Crook. In 1942, In the midst of World War II, David resolved to return home and enlist in the war effort. Isabel suspended her research and they returned to the UK together, with Isabel joining the British Communist Party. Soon afterwards, they married and Isabel enlisted too. By 1946, the fighting in Europe was over, yet the civil war in China was raging. The future of the country was to be determined. In the areas they controlled, a key policy of the communists was land reform, aimed at overthrowing the rural gentry and winning the farmers' support for establishing a new China.
I heard that there's land reform going on in China, and I thought that I would have an opportunity, because I was a communist and had good relations with the Chinese Communist Party. I thought that I could go back and really get into the land reform, not just be a foreign observer. I thought it was something that India should learn. And one of my reasons for studying the land reform was to be able to write, for David and me to write a book that could help the Indians and help other colonial peoples learn from China.
The couple made contact with the local communist government in a border region of northern China. They then traveled to Hong Kong, and from there made the dangerous journey across nationalist-controlled inland areas. Eventually, in November 1947, they reached a village named Shili Dian, or 10 Mile Inn, and the village was one of a few neighboring villages that housed the local communist government.
The guest house of the local communist government was located in 10 Mile Inn. In November 1947, the crooks arrived in the border region and were offered to stay in the guest house.
Well, the first thing the party said to us is, if you want to follow, the land reform is going to start in about 3 months' time. So you should take these 3 months and get to know as many families as you can. When we were attending the land reform, we wouldn't be the objects of interest.
It was the late 1940s, and China's was still largely a rural economy. 350 million people were living in the countryside, most of them poor peasants or hired hands. Their fate would be changed once and for all by the land reform. Unlike the previous rural reconstruction movement, land reform was led by the Communist Party and aimed at changing the land ownership and providing poor peasants with farmland. For Isabel, the land reform changed the course of the country and that of her own as well. She is convinced that the key to the success of the land reform was the mass line.
And the mass line was that you have to go down and find out what the people really want. Don't just imagine that they want something. Go down, look, find the details, what sort of things they want, and then you have to plan on how you're going to organize these people to stand up and carry through these reforms.
My family had been homeless. Then we were provided with a courtyard complex during the land reform and 1/4 acre of fertile farmland.
Isabel would later record in her books that the land reform in the late 1940s was the only way to effectively eliminate the disparity between the rich and the poor in China's countryside. The reason for its success was that it followed the mass line. The couple took part in land reform meetings in the daytime and recorded their observations at night. This was their routine throughout the 6 months they stayed in the village. They lived in a house provided by the local government. They ate twice a day, mostly millet and corn buns. But they considered the discomfort and inconvenience more than worth it, in view of what they achieved.
When we first got there, was the fact that there was no home heating. It was wintertime. And so David and I decided that we would learn to, you know, live in cold, be accustomed to living in cold circumstances. But Bill Hinton said, told them to order some coal to come. There was a coal mine about 30 miles away, and so they brought back coal from the coal mine, so we had a stove.
They were sleeping on the brick bed. It was all cold. Nowadays you have the electric warming pad, but not then. There was no electricity, so they had a tough time here.
Isabel talked to everyone in the village, and everyone talked to her, especially the children. She was a very popular figure.
The land reform was obviously going to change the whole future of China's history, because it would get rid of the feudal system, or the old ways of doing things, because it would put the working people, put the farmers in power.
It was the day that New China was founded. Isabel was on the review stand, bearing witness to the most historic moment in China's revolution.
We sat in the back row, and in front of us sat a wonderful delegation of Soviet writers that had come out from the Soviet Union to take part, including Simonov and Fadeev. Our school took full part in this, and the students marched in and stood at the front, along with maybe students from Beida.
By the early 1960s, Isabel and David judged their two elder sons to be old enough to learn about China's revolution. So, they embarked on a tour of key revolutionary sites. Their hope was that the boys would inherit their own cause.
She felt that it was by right. She had the right cause. She was convinced that we would follow in her footsteps. She was very much happy with whichever choice, but the idea was that I should have a purposeful life, and preferably one that was the same cause as hers.
The tour was also supposed to be a farewell look at China before the family returned to England. But afterwards, Isabel and David signed and decided to stay, supporting the very cause of the country.
For my mother, she grew up in China, and she chose, you know, China was something that, a place that she had great love for people, for what was going on, for the nature, the mountains, yeah.
I came to be an anthropologist, but they needed me to be a teacher. So I taught until I was 66, and then I retired. And then I decided to go back and try to pick up where I'd left off and finish up on this place in Sichuan. It wasn't open for foreigners. So I went to the Experts Bureau, and they arranged for me to be able to go to this part of Sichuan. When we went back in the 80s, the men were wearing these sleeveless knitwear shirts and Western-style trousers. But the main thing was everybody looked so healthy.
Isabel has 3 sons, 6 grandchildren, and 5 great-grandchildren. She has plenty of time now to enjoy their company. However, her husband can no longer share the joy with her. Her guiding spirit, and the dearest one for 6 decades. He left her 16 years ago. There's a bust of David Crook on campus, and every year on his birthday, Isabel and her family visit it.
See the
Mum,
flowers?
what do you think? Shall we put the flowers in front of the bust?
Yes, I think.
You do it?
Yeah, you do
Or shall we do it?
Whatever what
You
think.
do it.
Let them do it.
Okay, you do it. Okay. Is that nice?
Are we going to?
Oh, you want to wipe it?
I just want to.
I got a cloth here, Mum.
You?
Yes, I got.
Oh.
You want to take your gloves off?
Yeah. To David. To David.
In the early period of Isabel's 100 years, she crossed snow-covered mountains and turbulent rivers in pursuit of a cause. David eventually helped her to find her life's conviction. Then, she devoted herself wholeheartedly to it, unswayed by all the changes in the world.
I think in the earlier years, the impression I got, but maybe this was part of her education, principle, that the world was a more black and white place. There was right, there was wrong, and what was good was more clear-cut, and there was a simpler route to follow. But as the years have passed, she seems to embrace that there are many facets to the world. There are many ways that people can lead their lives, and she is very happy to try and understand people's choices in life.
Isabel has been living in the same apartment for the past 62 years. She's never taken much pleasure in pursuing her personal interests. Instead, she has followed her conviction. To her, a worthwhile life is a life with purpose. And her purpose has been to give all she has to China, the land she calls home.